Taiwan reported 30 Chinese warplanes flew into its air defence zone in the southwest in what seems to be a warning or a preparation for war. Something very serious is going on. Joining me is Australia's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of The Australian. Greg, thanks for your time. What is going on?
Well, Andrew, you're right to be very concerned about it. This is extremely dangerous behaviour by the Chinese. They do this with the Taiwanese, with the Japanese and with the Americans. They engage in extremely dangerous manoeuvres in air, taking their fighter planes right up to foreign fighter planes, and they do it at sea as well. And they won't have any safety hotlines or anything like that. They won't have any agreed rules of the road. Now, because they don't recognise Taiwan's right to exist or its sovereignty or anything else, they don't recognise its air defence identification zone. Now, that means when they breach that zone, the Taiwanese have to scramble fighter jets in case the Chinese are about to attack. I think it's designed to demoralise the Taiwanese, to it's a bit of braggadocio. It shows too how hypocritical the Chinese are when they say they're offering olive branches and they've put away their wolf warrior diplomacy and so forth. It's all transactional, it's all tactical, and they hope one day that they'll get Taiwan to submit without a war. I don't think they will. I think they'll have to go to war if they want to reclaim Taiwan.
That massacre last week in a Texan school turns out to have an horrific twist. 19 children and 2 teachers were shot dead by an 18-year-old gunman. But what we've now learned is that for 40 minutes, while desperate parents outside were stopped from trying to save their children, police inside the school refused to break into the classroom where the gunman and the children were. They refused to risk their lives charging in, even though some of the surviving children in that room were calling 911 for help. Now, one Republican congressman, Dan Crenshaw, a former Navy SEAL, was scathing.
Was clearly a scary scenario. They don't want to get shot, and so they don't do it, even though they've had the training that specifically says that you need to put their lives before your life. And the training specifically says in the manual that if you don't like that, you should find another career field. And the fact that that was not followed is heartbreaking.
Joining me is American-born political commentator James Morrow, now the Daily Telegraph's federal political editor and co-host of Outsiders. This is absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, armed police not wanting to risk their lives to save children in a massacre. What does that say?
Well, I mean, Andrew, if you sign up to become a police officer, carry a badge, carry a gun, have the right to use lethal force on behalf of the state to protect people, to protect the innocent. There's nobody more innocent than these little kids who are in this classroom that's getting shot up by this madman, and you refuse to go in and your commanders? There was one lieutenant who was on TV the other day who said, oh, well, you have to understand, the American people have to understand, they could have been shot. Well, hello, that's your job. That's why you sign up to be a police officer. But there's another point to this, Andrew. Every time there is a huge, massive news event, a major tragedy, whatever it is, there's a fog of news, and very often people try and politically jump onto that. And, we saw all the people on the left, the Democrats, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, say, the whole solution to this whole thing, this would never happen if you had gun control. And there's a legitimate debate you can have about letting kids, 18-year-old people, buy AR-15s. Sure, we can have that. But, you cannot just say that if you've got police that aren't doing their job. And the final thing I'll say is the Border Patrol, who Joe Biden so maligns for their terrible, evil job of keeping the southern border safe, they're the ones who rushed in and actually took down the killer.
Global warming, is there any chance that you're going to challenge the scaremongering when we've actually got school children crying with fear about the end of the world? On camera, we've seen this. Would you, for instance, point out, look, hang on, guys, our dams are actually filling, they're not emptying, our crops are getting bigger, not smaller, and we've never been less likely to die in a climate catastrophe. Are you going to be the voice that says, look at the science, it's not the climate crisis that a lot of people are saying?
Well, Andrew, if it was limited just to environmental issues or just to climate change, then it would be bad enough. The extremism of some of the teachers and the language that they use, the the approach that they take, but it's across a broad range of public policy areas. And I think the national curriculum, the values argument is going to be one of the big debates over this parliament. And I think you will see a big difference between the policies that we take to the next election compared to what Labor will. Labor's completely and utterly dominated by the union movement, as we know, and the teachers' union is one of the strongest voices within the ALP, and not in a good way. So there's, there are many teachers out there who are incredibly frustrated by what's taking place, and I want to shine a light on that and let parents be the judge of what's being taught in their schools, whether they believe it's acceptable or not.
And to culture wars. But as I said at the top of the show, tomorrow the Queen starts the celebrations for 70 years of loyal service as the head of state to Australia as well. And Labor marked this yesterday by appointing Matt Thistlethwaite as our first Assistant Minister for the Republic, or shall we say, for getting rid of the Queen, with a team of public servants to actually help him. Joining me is Rowan Dean, editor of Spectator Australia and host of Outsiders on Sky News every Sunday at 9 a.m. Rowan, to me, appointing this Assistant Minister for the Republic when the much-loved Queen is 96 years old sounds a little bit like appointing a vulture to a nursing home. He's just waiting to pounce, isn't he, the minute she dies?
100%, Andrew. I mean, it's hilarious, isn't it, how the Liberal government of Scott Morrison refused to engage in the culture wars because that was somehow beneath them, whereas Anthony Albanese has not wasted a second and has made it very clear he's not going to waste a single day of the next 3 years to fight the culture wars with the full power of the bureaucracy behind him, the media, the ABC. This is a scary 3 years we're in for, and this is just one of the many cultural appointments they are making. It reminds you of the kind of approach of communists and socialists through history to appoint ministers to cultural roles and to change the thinking of people.
Reminder to Labor of our history. All through the election campaign, we heard from Anthony Albanese, now Prime Minister, how he came from a housing commission flat with a single mum. He even made ads about it.
But my story begins here in a council house in Camperdown. Just me and Mum. She wasn't well, and it wasn't easy.
And today, our new Education Minister, Jacinta, in his first interview since his promotion, also advertised that he too came from nowhere.
I'm the first person in my family to go to uni. I'm the first person in the family to finish high school. I'm the first person in the family to finish year 10. The idea that a kid from Cabramatta could rise one day to become the Education Minister still blows my mind.
Now, two things about this. First, I think we're increasingly forgetting the most important thing about a politician is not how they seem. Whether they seem nice, whether they're male or female, of one race or another, or whether they have a sneer, whether they have done it tough. That might help to explain them, but what should really count is what they will do for you. It's the doing, not the seeming. Now, the second thing is this. I actually like those stories, Albanese, Jacinta. They tell us that this country does have something special. You can come from nothing and be something. But what jars with me is that today's Labor somehow seems to suggest that this is all very new. They're marvelling at this being their story, like it's quite new and fresh. In fact, this country has been wonderful in precisely this way from the very beginning, from the ex-convicts who got rich. In politics, our seventh Prime Minister, the great Billy Hughes, was an immigrant who worked in a factory. He picked fruit, worked as a ship's cook. Labor Prime Minister Ben Chifley was a train driver before politics. Julia Gillard's father was a psychiatric nurse, not much money there. Kevin Rudd's father was a share farmer who died young, leaving the family homeless. Scott Morrison's dad was a policeman, and Billy Snedden, who once led the Liberal Party, probably had it hardest of all. His dad was just a general labourer who walked out of the family when Snedden was just 3 or 4. His mother worked in a laundry. Now, we need to tell young Australians these stories are not unusual. They aren't something recent. They are actually woven into our history. And you don't understand Australia unless you know that this country was built by a lot of people who didn't start with much, but left us with plenty. Well, now that the cat's away or been voted out of office, the rats will play. Well, Well, to be honest, the Liberals in government did just about zero in 9 years to make the ABC do what it must by law and by its own charter. The public broadcaster must be impartial in its news, balanced in its views. What did the Liberals ever do to make sure that it was? And boy, are they going to pay for that now that they've been beaten and Labor is in power instead, promising the ABC even more money. You take the ABC's flagship Q&A show last Thursday. Forget all that pretense that, Q&A picks an audience that's balanced. Or maybe the fact is the left really is more feral. Take the cheers from that audience for the Green senator and the climate independent, and the jeers for the beaten Liberals.
I am very concerned that we will get into the same divisive politics that have been under Tony Abbott, under Scott Morrison. And I think the Liberal Party should think really hard in choosing the next leader.
We will come back to whether these talking points worked for you during the campaign, but I mean,
clearly they did.
I mean, the fact is. I mean, thank goodness you're not running the government. But your invitation.
Well, you're not running it either anymore.
Well,
why do we have to be held to account for the mess that the Morrison government has left us?
Joining me on Newswatch is Jack Houghton, digital editor here on Sky News and also host of the Media Show every Friday. Jack Houghton, that was some left-wing lynch mob on Q&A.
Yeah, very interesting, was it? I felt a bit sorry for poor Alexander Downer sitting over there in the corner having to endure some of the vitriolic commentary from a panel, particularly that Greens representative there, which was, they're supposed to be talking about everybody coming together in this nicer form of politics. And the attack on Peter Dutton there, I just found absolutely egregious. And a couple of times throughout the night, Alexander Downer actually had to say, I thought we were talking about a nicer form of politics, but it appears that they've got a tiny little slither of power, a tiny taste of power as they've been bragging about the last couple of weeks, and it just goes right to their head.
The Jerusalem Post, a leading newspaper in Israel, has just interviewed the Foreign Minister of Taiwan, right, an independent island, democracy. He warned that Communist China was getting ready to invade Taiwan because it thinks this democratic island nation is actually China's to take. And unbelievably, the Jerusalem Post editor said as soon as that interview went online, the Chinese ambassador rang, demanded the article be killed, and warned that otherwise China would in some way, do something about relations with Israel, that harm them, punish Israel itself. I mean, this is the new world order that Communist China is trying to build. I mean, you've already seen it bullying Australia. It's just incredible. And this all leads me in an indirect way to a very surprising election result. One that might actually make some people think, good heavens, One Nation isn't exactly the party I thought. There may be a lot more to it. The election result I'm talking about wasn't the federal one, in the federal election we just had, but in last month's South Australian election where the Liberals got tossed out. For the first time, One Nation won a seat there in the upper house. And the winner was Sarah Game, who's a vet and the daughter of Jewish grandparents. And she's now pushing for a new law against anti-Semitism. Sarah Game, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us what you're pushing for.
Well, what happened basically is I became aware that this IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, definition of anti-Semitism had been endorsed federally both by Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese, and then put forward separately in both New South Wales and Victoria. And it hadn't been put forward here. And I really felt, our party is very much about protecting faith communities and people's personal freedoms and right to practice their beliefs in a way that is safe and free from discrimination. And so on that basis, although we have a very small Jewish community here, I felt it was important that South Australia really come into line with the federal position and the position in Victoria and New South Wales.